When we decided to terminate our contract with the boutique hotel operator, there were certain conditions that came with the contract. One of which was they would dismantle their proprietary systems that they had set up in terms of operations. So that means we are left with having to introduce a new proprietary management system again in terms of that, the digital and the computers, etc. The other one was trying to re-establish our positions with the OTAs, the online travel agents, and the arrangements that we already had with them under the operator. So all of these things meant that we would literally have to redo everything, including our collaterals, because they had produced a website which reflected their group as opposed to the house as an individual destination. So all those things really had to be resolved during the course of termination as well as going forwards, right? And that's when I really turned to Shen and said, given your experience with digital online businesses, could you step in and take over that role?
So it was good timing. It was very almost serendipitous that I came in. And my background was also working for a marketplace. So very similar. I was in a business that's very similar to what OTAs do. So I knew how they thought. Had what hoteliers call rate parity, right? Which is essentially making sure that we place priority on our own rates, our own direct bookings, and ensure that we get more volume, more people booking direct rather than through the OTAs. And if we distribute to the OTAs, that their rates were fair. We never got a lower rate. As a guest, you never get a lower rate on an Agoda or Booking.com than you do with us. So we started really exploring, being present, being much more present, and being much more, I guess, accepting of the fact that the world had changed. It's almost about really going down, making a list of things that we needed to do, as boring as that sounds, and ticking those boxes. So we needed to build a new website. We needed to manage what we call our revenue management, which is essentially distributing our content and our rates to the OTAs. We needed to rebuild our social media profiles, all of which was actually very important at that time. If we rewind the clock again to when I became involved in 2015, anecdotally what we understood at that point in time was that our guest profile, and we're talking about the hotel here, right? The rooms here, our guest profile was very niche, right? We generally appealed to a slightly older demographic, or people who appreciate culture, architecture, heritage. And again, we're talking about people who would want to stay here. We're not talking about the tours, and other people who may walk through this building. So what we quickly recognized was that, one, we had to decide very early on what we were. As you know, we have many different revenue streams. We have the hotel, we have the restaurant, we have the tours, but we needed to decide very quickly what we were first and foremost. And I think once we looked at the data and the numbers, it became clear that the rooms, we should be a hotel first, and then everything else would follow. Besides getting the marketing and the revenue management and the distribution right, and making sure we brought people in, we then needed to make sure we delivered or over-delivered on the promise. So again, what we did was, we changed everything. We changed our property management system from old and dated to something much newer that was more, I guess, that gave us the ability to understand our customer better. And we also implemented the tools and what we call a reputation management tool to really be able to dissect the feedback that came back from guests and then use that to improve our operations. So yeah, I mean, we essentially place a lot of importance on being able to, almost being obliged as a smaller boutique hotel to know our customer better than the larger chains. And that's how boutique hotels essentially have an advantage over the larger chains. Every business that it was in hospitality, retail, anything, almost every business really, unless you're fully online, was bleeding. So we suffered from exactly the same thing as every other hotel did. I think we were fortunate enough that we were small, you know, so our costs weren't that high. This is a bit of a fine dining restaurant, right? So our prices are slightly high, our food doesn't travel well, you know, it's all plated, you know. We had to pivot to a delivery model like every other restaurant did. We had to get on the Grabs, we had to get on the food pandas. In fact, that was the only revenue source for about, if I remember correctly, about 4 to 6 months, right? And it made up literally 5% of our total monthly revenue. So you can imagine how bad it was. We did flash sales, so we would sell rooms ahead. So we were really, I think, the first to do that. And then a lot of other hotels started first in Penang to do that. Definitely not the world, but we started selling coupons and really cheap rates and really flexible sort of benefits. So you could change any number of times for the next 12 months, use it whenever you want, but we essentially sell ahead at a much lower rate. Happy to say that we survived. We certainly didn't thrive, but you know, and so a lot of the things we did felt like we did so much for so little reward during that time. But having the gumption to just keep going and trying everything, you know, was the key, really. So let's break that down into our 3 main revenue streams, which are essentially our hotels, the rooms, the restaurant, F&B, the restaurants now, and the tours. If you talk about just sort of the mix, pre-COVID, post-COVID, it's about 45, and we're talking about just pure revenue here, right? Top line. It's about 45%, and 15%. So 45 rooms, 40 to 45, right? Restaurant, and then 15%, 10 to 15% tours. If one were to look at it purely from a revenue perspective, you know, you'd say it becomes pretty obvious which ones are more important. But I think the tours, especially leading up to today, played a very important part in building that narrative and making sure more people understand and building that story about, or that urban myth that we were talking about, about the man, about the building, and putting that into consciousness of people. In terms of the restaurant, as I work my way up in order of importance, the restaurant, I think F&B is something every hotel has to have anyway. I think it was a conscious decision to make sure that it was of a higher standard, and I think it's still one of the top-rated restaurants in Penang today. But anyone in F&B, unless you're entirely passionate about it, will tell you that it's a very slim margin business, right? So it's nice and it's good from a cash flow perspective, but you don't expect to run an F&B business that returns a lot of dividends to its shareholders. So then you look at the rooms, and I think when you break down and you look at the P&L, you look at the rooms, it becomes obvious that that's the most profitable segment of revenue stream for this place. The movies and the events, I think those are just nice bonuses, you know, to get. They're certainly not a conscious part of our business model, because you cannot rely on films being shot here all the time, and it helps, you know, by way of a spike in our revenue, but it also helps from a marketing perspective and a PR perspective. So I think if you ask me what the surprises were, not so much surprises, but maybe we're really surprised by how much Crazy Rich Asians, for example, which was shot, I think it was 2018 or something like that, how much that that almost, like Crazy Rich Asians, was responsible for a nice problem that we had, but it almost contributed to, I guess, what you call over-tourism in this building. Because of Crazy Rich Asians, we became part of the consciousness of a much, much younger profile. You know, all the Instagrammers started coming here, and the number of times I've seen hashtag Rachel Chu for the day, or hashtag not so rich crazy Asian, or whatever it is, right? Recall back to 2019, there were days when 150 people would show up per tour. And you can imagine, as a hotel guest, you know, staying here, how intrusive 150 people coming through that building was. Not to mention how much damage they potentially could cause to the building with the wear and tear over time. So, I think nice problems to have, but surprising nonetheless how successful just one movie could, how much impact just one movie could have.
There are various stages to that issue of funding, right? So right at the beginning, obviously, it was purely raising funds to purchase the place and to invest in restoration of the place. Again, things happen for a reason. At that time, they just launched this tourism fund, which had very cheap interest rates. So we borrowed an tourism fund, and we used it to help us through at least 2 phases of the work. And we managed to recoup progressively in order so that we could return the money to the banks and take possession of the title. When it came to the homestays, the revenue was good, but it was not really in the quantum that you would think about as in the same rate as capital appreciation of the land. So we relied a lot on that. As we went through the boutique phase and then subsequently to the present phase, that's when the shift also started to happen, that the revenue actually started really going up. I would say that in terms of funding, it's very critical to prepare for the downside, especially in hospitality and tourism. And we learned the hard way, you know, in the first 20 years, that everything hits you. If there's SARS in Hong Kong, if there's a bombing in Bali, all of that, recession in Malaysia, everything affects you. I've learned that if you want to go into a particular business, you have to factor all of that in, and you have to factor the bad times. And even in a sort of one season, there are really quiet periods, right? So when Europe was coming here, somehow you knew when summer was over, also the market dropped. So I think what got us through this particular phase, the COVID pandemic phase, is that mentally we had already prepared ourselves for some sort of disaster in the hospitality business. I'm not saying that I can see in the future, but there are reserves for it. So I think one of the questions very evident in people's minds is, if you don't have enough money, you don't have the capital, should you go into the hotel business, right? And I would say, you can try your luck, but you ride the wave, and when something unexpected hits you, if you can't get through that phase, then you're out. And so far, I would say that we were very wise in keeping reserves. I would say almost to maybe meeting 2, 3, 4 months. And for some reason, it actually dragged on 2 years, but we still survived that. But it's very important for me, at least in this business, to really have solid reserves.
The legal problems that we faced, that took a huge chunk. And you know, of course, about the piling and the damage. Certainly the fact that the judgment was in our favor, that helped. That helped. And it also provided us with that safety net to fall back on if we ever needed the money.
I am basically the heritage site manager, and my duty is to visit the heritage site as often as I can, and when I am unable to do it, I have appointed someone from my office who's also trained in conservation to carry out the maintenance inspections. When something needs to be done, we already have a list of conservation contractors who are conversant with techniques and materials related to conservation, and we just purely give them the instructions to do the necessary work. So in that sense, it has an ongoing regime of conservation management in place ever since we finished conserving the work and turning it into the hotel.
It's pretty straightforward. This is running any sort of organization. You need to, I guess, ensure your organizational, for lack of a better word, your organizational chart addresses and is aligned to your vision and your idea of what you want to achieve, and that's how we essentially do it. You move with the times, right? So I think you just need to ensure that. I mean, I'll give you an example. I think when in the early days when I became involved, talk about information management and data management. Again, we come back to knowing your customer, right? It's the single most important thing in a business like this. Our systems that we had did not allow us to do that, right? So we implemented the tools that were necessary in order for us to be able to achieve that. And then I guess from a communication perspective, look, we just use all the tools that we have, right? Like we make sure that, I think I've got about 12 different WhatsApp groups in my phone, and we just make sure that the sort of, I guess, the formula that we have is then replicated by the managers, in each department, etc. So we try and ensure that they all communicate what's happening in the business to their team as well.
The next chapter, hopefully for me, it's just to enjoy it. To get to the point, after 30 years, to sit back and enjoy the place without worrying about it, without stressing about it, which we have, for 30 years.
Really, the brand itself has multiple facets, and what I would like to see is to really grow that brand. Whoever chooses to use it as a conservation iconic emblem, right, or simply as something to be enjoyed.
I guess for me, we've really maximized what this place can do. Like, as my dad said, we've activated every single space. We've got a new cafe which we launched during the MCO. The other is, like, if we really want to continue this legacy and this brand, and leveraging on this brand, I think we're in a very unique situation, and we could be biased in that, the brand Cheong Fatt and the brand The Blue Mansion is so much bigger than the business. So I think we need to grow into the brand. And the only way we can do that is to expand consciously and very deliberately and in a very selective manner. Our vision and what we want to do in the future, I think it's really just to continue being iconic, to continue being part of the fabric of the city, continuing being for Penangites as much as we are for international tourists, continuing to inspire other people. I think inspire other artists, architects, and any artisans, that seem to be inspired by this building. So I think we just want to ensure that legacy continues.